Imagine for a moment the picture most people carry of Jesus. Gentle, compassionate, always smiling, always patient. We see him holding children, healing the sick, and teaching about love. But then comes a striking question. If Jesus is the embodiment of love, why do the Gospels also show him getting angry? That single thought unsettles many, because we often equate anger with sin, loss of control, or hostility. Yet the Bible reveals a very different kind of anger in Jesus, an anger that was never selfish or reckless, but always purposeful and holy. Across the Gospels, there are moments when Jesus' face hardens, his voice rises, or his actions become fierce. He overturns tables, confronts hypocrisy, and even rebukes his closest friends. Each time, his anger is not about annoyance or irritation. It is about defending truth, protecting people, and honoring God. This is not rage. It is what theologians call righteous indignation. In a world where injustice and falsehood often go unchallenged, Jesus' anger reminds us that real love is not passive. Real love confronts what harms, what corrupts, and what misleads. So why does this matter to us today? Because his reactions still challenge our own. Do we become angry only when our pride is hurt? Or do we also feel a holy discontent when others are exploited, when truth is twisted, or when the vulnerable are silenced? The stories of Jesus' anger are not just ancient history. They are living lessons that speak into our faith, our communities, and even our personal struggles. In this journey, we will walk through each recorded moment of Jesus' anger, uncovering not only what provoked him, but also what it reveals about his heart. And by the end, you may find that his anger was never a contradiction to his love. It was, in fact, an expression of it. The scene is unforgettable. Jesus walks into the temple courts, the very heart of Jewish worship, and instead of prayerful silence, he finds chaos. Merchants shout prices, coins clatter on the stone floors, animals shuffle in pens, and the air is thick with bargaining. What should have been a sanctuary had become a market. The Gospels tell us that Jesus does not simply sigh in disappointment. He acts. He overturns tables, scatters the coins of the money changers, and drives out the sellers. With a voice like thunder, he declares, "It is written, 'My house shall be called a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers.'" Matthew 21-13. This was not a fit of uncontrollable rage. It was a deliberate act of righteous anger. Jesus saw sacred space being dishonored, and people's faith being exploited for profit. In John's Gospel, his disciples remember the prophecy, "Zeal for your house will consume me." That zeal burned against anything that cheapened the presence of God. To understand the weight of this, we need to remember what the temple symbolized. It was more than a building. It represented God's dwelling among his people. To treat it like a shopping mall was to insult the holiness of God himself. And here lies the deeper question. What would Jesus overturn in our own lives? Where have we replaced reverence with routine, or treated faith as a transaction instead of a relationship? History echoes this warning. During the Middle Ages, the church was shaken by practices such as selling indulgences, turning forgiveness into a financial product. That corruption sparked reformers like Martin Luther to cry out against making salvation a business. The temple scene reminds us that whenever greed hijacks worship, the tables must be flipped. And it challenges us today. Do we approach God as a service provider expecting convenience, or do we come in humility, recognizing his holiness? Paul reminds believers in 1 Corinthians 6:19 that our bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit. If that is true, then cleansing is not only about stone walls in Jerusalem, but about the condition of our own hearts. Jesus' anger in the temple was not about destruction. It was about restoration, clearing space for true worship again. Real love, after all, confronts what corrupts, so that renewal can begin. If there was one group that repeatedly stirred Jesus' anger, it was the Pharisees and religious leaders. Outwardly, they appeared flawless. Prayers offered in public squares, fasting displayed with solemn faces, robes meticulously prepared. To the casual observer, they seemed like models of holiness, yet Jesus saw beneath the surface. Inside, there was pride, greed, and hypocrisy. They were not pursuing God's heart. They were performing religion for applause. In Matthew 23, Jesus delivers one of his strongest rebukes. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! Over and over, he unmasks their duplicity. They pile rules upon rules, burdening others with impossible standards, while finding loopholes for themselves. They polish the outside of their lives, but ignore what really matters: justice, mercy, and faithfulness. His words cut deep. You are like whitewashed tombs, beautiful on the outside, but inside full of dead men's bones. Matthew 23:27. This was not cruelty, it was clarity. Jesus' anger here was protective, not petty. He confronted false religion to guard truth and to shield the people being misled. These leaders used God's name not to serve, but to build their own platforms, and that spiritual manipulation was intolerable. The lesson stretches across centuries. Religious hypocrisy did not vanish in the first century. Even today, there is a temptation to value image over integrity. We post Bible verses online, but harbor bitterness privately. We attend worship services faithfully, yet neglect compassion when it costs us something. We may wear the Christian label, but ignore the weightier matters of love and justice. History gives us vivid reminders. In the 18th century, John Wesley criticized churches in England that had become comfortable clubs for the wealthy, forgetting the poor. His preaching sparked revival precisely because he echoed the warning of Jesus. Religion without repentance is empty. Jesus reserved his sharpest anger not for the broken sinners who sought him, but for the self-righteous who believed they needed no grace. Pride wrapped in religious clothing is still pride. Performance cannot replace a humble, surrendered heart. His rebuke was both a warning and an invitation to drop the mask, leave behind empty rituals, and return to a real relationship with God. His anger, then, was not rejection. It was love in disguise, calling people out of falsehood and into authentic faith. One of the most striking glimpses of Jesus' anger occurs in a synagogue on the Sabbath. Mark 3:1-6 describes the moment. A man with a shriveled hand stands before him. His suffering is plain to see, and the need for compassion is undeniable. Yet, instead of hearts moved with mercy, the religious leaders watch coldly, waiting to trap Jesus. They wonder, will he heal on the Sabbath? Their concern is not the man's restoration, but defending their system. Jesus, perceiving their thoughts, poses a piercing question. Which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill? Silence follows. No one dares answer, because their rigid rules had eclipsed the very heart of God's law. Mark records something rare and powerful. He looked around at them in anger, deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts. In that moment, his anger was not about broken rules, but broken compassion. The Sabbath was designed as a gift, a day of rest, renewal, and remembrance of God's goodness. Yet, these leaders had turned it into a burden, weaponizing it to maintain control. Their obsession with legal precision had blinded them to love. When Jesus commanded the man, "Stretch out your hand," and the hand was healed, mercy triumphed over hardness. But tragically, instead of rejoicing, the Pharisees left plotting his death. This story still speaks loudly today. How often do we cling to traditions or systems so tightly that we miss the person in front of us? Do we sometimes value being correct more than being compassionate? Churches and communities can fall into the same trap, protecting structures while neglecting souls. Consider modern parallels. Debates over policies or doctrines can sometimes drown out the very people those teachings are meant to serve. For example, in history, movements for social justice often faced resistance from religious institutions more concerned with order than with lifting the oppressed. The lesson is timeless. Right doctrine without right love is still wrong. Jesus' anger here was redemptive. He was grieved not because the law was wrong, but because their interpretation erased compassion. His rebuke reminds us, obedience to God should never excuse indifference to human suffering. True holiness is not found in cold rule-keeping, but in love that restores. Among the most surprising moments of Jesus' anger is when he rebukes not a Pharisee, not a demon, but Peter, his close disciple and friend. Just before this, Peter had declared with bold faith, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Matthew 16:16. Jesus commended him, calling him blessed for receiving such revelation. Yet, only a few verses later, the tone changes dramatically. When Jesus began to explain that he must suffer in Jerusalem, be killed, and then rise again, Peter could not accept it. In his loyalty, he pulled Jesus aside and said, "Never, Lord. This shall never happen to you." On the surface, it sounded like devotion, even love, but Jesus recognized something dangerous in those words. He turned and declared, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." Matthew 16:23. Why such a fierce rebuke? Because Peter was unknowingly echoing the very temptation Jesus had faced in the wilderness. Skip the suffering, take the crown without the cross. To bypass the cross would have meant abandoning God's redemptive plan. And Jesus, in his holy anger, confronted this head-on. His sharp words were not meant to crush Peter, but to protect the mission and rescue his disciple from misplaced thinking. This moment carries a sobering lesson for us. Sometimes the people who love us most can unintentionally steer us away from God's will. Advice that sounds kind. Take the easy path, avoid hardship, protect yourself first, may actually conflict with God's purposes. Jesus shows us that even well-meaning words must be tested against God's truth. History offers parallels. Many reformers and prophets faced opposition from those closest to them, urged to stay silent for safety rather than confront injustice. But true calling often requires courage to endure suffering for the sake of greater good. Jesus' rebuke of Peter reminds us that following him is not about comfort, but about surrender. Love sometimes says no to our best intentions when they conflict with God's plan. His holy anger in this moment was not rejection of Peter, but refinement, shaping him into a disciple who would one day embrace the cross, not run from it. Few moments reveal both the tenderness and the fierceness of Jesus' heart, like the scene with the children. Parents were bringing their little ones to him so that he might bless them, but the disciples stepped in, scolding and blocking the way. Mark 10:13. In their minds, they were probably protecting Jesus' time, keeping things serious and important. Children, after all, were not seen as significant in the ancient world. They held no power, no voice, no status. But when Jesus saw his disciples turning them away, the gospel says he was indignant. Mark 10:14. That word is strong. It conveys more than mild annoyance. It means he was deeply offended, stirred with holy anger. This is the only time in the Gospels that such a word is used of Jesus' emotions. His anger was not directed at the children, of course, but at the barriers his own followers were placing in their path. Then he speaks words that overturn cultural norms. "Let the little children come to me and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these." Matthew 19:14. He not only welcomes them, but elevates them, declaring that childlike trust, openness, and humility are essential for entering God's kingdom. What the world considered insignificant, Jesus honored as precious. This moment challenges us today. How often do our religious or social structures unintentionally shut out the overlooked, the poor, the marginalized, the young, or the powerless. When churches become more about formality than hospitality, when we value prestige over openness, we risk provoking the same indignation from Jesus. History has shown that societies are judged by how they treat their weakest members. Reformers, such as William Wilberforce in England, fought for the rights of children and the oppressed, echoing the same conviction that every life matters. In modern times, global movements for children's rights carry the same spirit of protecting those without a voice. Jesus' anger here was not harsh but holy. It reminds us that his kingdom is not built for the elite or the powerful, but for the lowly and the trusting. If he made space for the least of these, then we are called to do the same. His indignation was a shield of love, fiercely defending those whom society dismissed. It was supposed to be a routine trip across the lake. Several of the disciples were seasoned fishermen, men who knew the waters well. But suddenly, a violent storm swept in. Waves crashed over the boat, wind howled through the night, and panic gripped their hearts. Meanwhile, Jesus was asleep on a cushion in the stern, resting peacefully amid the chaos. Mark 4:38. In desperation, the disciples shook him awake. "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" What happens next is breathtaking. Jesus rises, speaks directly to the storm, and commands, "Peace, be still." Instantly, the wind dies down, and the sea becomes calm. The disciples are left in stunned silence. But then Jesus turns to them, not with soothing comfort, but with a sharp rebuke. "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" Mark 4:40. His words may sound harsh, but they were not born of impatience. They were a wake-up call. Jesus was not angry that they woke him. He was distressed that after all the miracles, after all the time they had walked with him, they still doubted his care and power. Their fear had blinded them to the reality of who was in the boat with them. This was not just about an external storm, it was about the inner storm of unbelief. The lesson is timeless. In our own lives, storms come in many forms. Financial crises, broken relationships, illness, global uncertainties. Like the disciples, we cry out, "God, don't you care?" And sometimes he calms the storm around us. Other times, he calms the storm within us. Either way, his presence remains constant. History shows how faith has carried people through unimaginable storms. During the Great Depression, families clung to prayer when resources failed. In times of war, believers gathered in bomb shelters, singing hymns louder than the sirens overhead. The peace of Christ was not the absence of trouble, but the presence of trust. Jesus' rebuke was not rejection, it was invitation. He was calling his disciples to deeper faith, to believe not only when the sea was smooth, but when everything shook. Faith is proven not in calm waters, but in raging storms. His holy anger here was meant to awaken, not to condemn, to remind us that trust in him is stronger than fear. We have walked through some of the most intense moments in the Gospels, scenes where Jesus displayed holy anger. From the temple courts to the open sea, his rebukes and fierce words were never random or selfish. They were purposeful, born from love and devotion to truth. Each story reveals that his anger was not a flaw in his character, but a window into his heart. When he overturned tables in the temple, it was to protect worship from corruption. When he rebuked the Pharisees, it was to defend the vulnerable from hypocrisy. When he healed on the Sabbath, his anger exposed how rules had been twisted to choke compassion. When he corrected Peter, it was to keep the mission of the cross clear. When he grew indignant at the disciples blocking children, it was to honor the least and defend their place in God's kingdom. And when he calmed the storm, his rebuke reminded his followers that trust is stronger than fear. Each of these moments teaches us something about what it means to follow him today. His anger challenges us to ask, what provokes my anger? Do I get upset only when my pride is wounded or my comfort is disturbed? Or do I, like Jesus, feel righteous indignation when people are exploited, when truth is distorted, or when the weak are silenced? History gives us examples of people who allowed holy anger to move them toward justice. William Wilberforce's fight against the slave trade, Martin Luther King Jr.'s voice against racial injustice, and countless unnamed believers who stood against corruption all reflect the same conviction. Love that never confronts is not true love. So, perhaps the question for us is this: if Jesus were to walk through my life today, what tables would he overturn? What masks would he confront? What fears would he rebuke? These are not questions meant to shame, but to invite transformation. His anger was always restorative, never destructive, always aimed at clearing the way for love, truth, and freedom. Jesus' example calls us to a faith that is both tender and fierce, gentle and bold. His love is not weak. It is strong enough to confront what is wrong so that what is right may flourish. And that love is still at work in us today.